Greetings everybody. Today's class is about fluid and electrolyte balance, and I am Dr. Mudassir, Assistant Professor of Physiology, who is going to speak few words about this. The specific learning objectives of today's class are: at the end of the class, the student should be able to explain what are the different body fluid compartments, how is ECF tonicity and volume maintained constant, and how is specific ionic concentration of ECF is maintained. Let us see the different body fluid compartments. The body fluid in an adult male is about 60% of his body weight, which can be divided into the fluid present inside the cell, which is called as intracellular fluid, which constitutes about 40% of body weight, and the fluid present outside the cell, which is called as extracellular fluid, which constitutes 20% of body weight. Out of this extracellular fluid, again it is divided into two major components: the blood plasma, which forms only 1/3 of the ECF, and remaining the larger chunk of ECF is formed by interstitial fluid. This is the fluid which surrounds the cells of our body. In other words, this interstitial fluid, which is the major component of extracellular fluid, forms the internal environment of the cell, which is also called as milieu interior. And maintenance of consistency of this milieu interior is homeostasis. All the organ systems of our body contribute for maintenance of the constancy of this milieu interior or internal environment, which is the constancy of constituents of this interstitial fluid, which is a major compartment of extracellular fluid. Now, coming to the constituents of ECF. Here clearly you can say this is the plasma, the outermost uh, component of extracellular fluid. Okay, these two, plasma and interstitial fluid, represent the extracellular fluid, and there is a lot of difference in electrolytes. Even though the osmolality is same, 290 milliosmoles per kg is the osmolality, normal osmolality of our body fluids, which is constant both in extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid, but the constituents vary. In ECF, you can see ECF and interstitial fluid, you can see the major cation is sodium, whereas minor cation is potassium. Major anion is chloride in plasma and interstitial fluid, and bicarbonate and proteins are minor anions in plasma. There are very less amount of anion proteins in interstitial fluid. On the contrary, if we see the intracellular fluid, it contains a lot of potassium as a major cation, and uh, uh, conversely, sodium is the minor cation inside the cell. The major anions are phosphates and proteins, anionic proteins, and bicarbonate and chloride are minor anions. Sorry, and the major anions in ECF are chloride, whereas minor anions in intracellular fluid are chloride. So that is about the. From the previous discussion, it is quite obvious that ECF is composed of water and ions, which are also osmotically active. Hence, the balance of fluid and electrolyte has got three components: maintenance of ECF, osmolality, ECF volume, and specific ionic composition for normal milieu interior. This milieu interior is maintained constant by the contributions of all the organ system. In particular, renal system contributes to maintenance of fluid and electrolyte balance. There are two separate mechanisms which regulate the ECF osmolality and ECF volume. ECF osmolality is maintained by monitoring and adjusting total body water content, and ECF volume is maintained constant, is regulated by monitoring and adjusting total body water content of sodium chloride. Confused? Yes. Let me explain this. Before explaining this, let me bring one fact to you, that water can freely move across the cell membrane between intracellular fluid compartment to extracellular fluid compartment. This free movement of water can be there, but there is no movement of osmotically active ions. They move only during depolarization or repolarization, or through the passively open channels, which is very minute. In normal state, there is very less movement of or nil movement of osmotically active ions across the cell membrane. But there is free movement of water. This free movement of water is decided by the osmotic concentration of the osmotically active ions. The more osmotically active ions, the water is dragged to that compartment, either in ICF or ECF. If ECF has got more osmotically active ions, then water is dragged from ICF into ECF. Conversely, if osmotically active ions increase in concentration in intracellular fluid, then fluid is dragged from extracellular fluid compartment into intracellular compartment. This is one important fact. Now moving on to how the regulation of osmolality is related to monitoring of water balance is. Let us see if there is any change in osmolality of ECF, then it can be restored either by altering the osmotically active ions, which is very difficult, as I have explained just now. But by adjusting the total body water content, it is very easy, which would dilute or concentrate to restore the osmolality. Hence, the body regulates extracellular osmolality by monitoring and adjusting total body water content. Now, this total water body content, how it is regulated, there are two different mechanisms which I will be discussing later. Now coming to the regulation of ECF volume by monitoring and adjusting sodium balance. How is it possible? Yes, whenever there is change in ECF volume, it can be restored by shifting water. It can be restored by shifting water across the cell membrane. But this drag or push, as I have stated earlier, is decided by concentration of osmotically active ions. Hence, body regulates ECF volume by monitoring and adjusting total body water content of sodium and chloride. Now, when the two separate interrelated control systems are regulating volume and osmolality, if the body has a choice, ECF volume regulation overrides the ECF osmolality regulation. Now few points about concept of osmolality. What is osmolality? It is the amount of solute per kilogram of solvent. Here the solute is the electrolytes which is present inside the extracellular fluid, and water is the solvent. It is also called as tonicity. The main ion responsible for osmolality in ECF is sodium. So sodium ion mainly decides the osmolality. So wherever the sodium moves, it along with it drags the water. So that's how it decides the amount of extracellular fluid, by dragging the water wherever it goes. When the sodium concentration increases, amount of ECF increases. When the sodium concentration decreases, amount of ECF also decreases. Okay, so now what is the normal plasma osmolality, or ECF osmolality is 290 milliosmoles per kg body weight. Next, the fluids which have the same osmolality as that of plasma or ECF are called as isotonic. Examples are normal saline, dextrose normal saline, 5% dextrose. These are the solvents which we use commonly for maintaining the normal osmolality of the patients in which we are giving the fluid therapy. The uh, other types of fluids are hypotonic solutions which have osmolality lesser than ECF osmolality. Example is half normal saline or 0.45% normal saline. The fluids which have osmolality higher than ECF osmolality are called as hypertonic solutions. Example is 3% normal saline. Now moving on to, now let us learn the effect of adding IV fluids to the body fluid compartments using Darrow-Yannet diagram. Here you are seeing on the left hand side top corner is the Darrow-Yannet diagram of a normal individual in normal state. You can see that On y-axis there is osmolality, and on x-axis it is a volume of body fluid. When isotonic solution is added, you can see that there is no change in the pink color area. Let me revise. This pink color area depicts intracellular fluid and yellow color area depicts extracellular fluid. Now when isotonic solution is added, you can see here that there is only increase in extracellular fluid volume. There is no change in osmolality or tonicity. When hypertonic solution is added, you can see that there is increase in volume of ICF and ECF, but there is reduction in tonicity of both intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. But when hypertonic solution is added, there is increase in tonicity of both ICF and ECF, and there is shift of volume or increase of volume in ICF, which is shifting from ICF. There is shift of volume from ICF to ECF. Maintenance of osmolality of ECF is done by two distinct mechanisms in our body. That is either by changing the intake in water or by changing the excretion of water. As example given here, whenever there is increase in osmolality, the two mechanisms are activated, which either increase the intake of water. For increasing the intake of water, thirst mechanism is activated, or appetite for thirst, appetite for water is increased. Simultaneously, there is another mechanism activated which decreases the water excretion, or in other words increases the water retention, which is by increasing the arginine vasopressin secretion. Now whenever the water content is increased either by increasing intake or by increasing the retention or decreasing the water excretion, it dilutes the ECF and brings back the osmolality to normal level. Now how it does, let us see in detail. In this diagram, you can see that whenever there is increase in osmolality, it stimulates the osmoreceptors present in anterior pituitary. Now these osmoreceptors are present outside the blood-brain barrier in two areas. One is organum vasculosum of lamina terminalis and SFO, the subfornical organ. These are the two different distinct osmoreceptors which are activated whenever there is increase in osmolality. One set of osmoreceptors, they activate thirst uh, thirst appetite or water appetite, which are called as thirst osmoreceptors present in OVLT and SFO. When these are activated by increase in osmolality, the thirst appetite is increased and person takes more water. There is increase in free water, which brings back the osmolality to normal level. Another mechanism activated by increase in osmolality is stimulation of osmoreceptors. Whenever there is increase in osmolality, what happens is there is shrinkage of osmoreceptors present in OVLT and SFO, which are specific for arginine vasopressin. When they are stimulated, the nerve endings of this arginine vasopressin neurons present in paraventricular nucleus and supraoptic nucleus of hypothalamus release AVP through the posterior pituitary. This acts on renal tubules by incorporating aquaporin 2 channels. When these aquaporin 2 channels are incorporated in the renal tubules, there is increase in water retention and there is decrease in water excretion. When the water retention is done along with increased water intake, what happens is there is dilution of ECF, which reduces the osmolality. So this is how the osmolality of ECF is maintained by two distinct mechanisms. One point important to remember here is the osmoreceptors activated for which activate thirst and which cause the release of ABP are two different set of osmoreceptors, but they are present in the same region of OVLT and SFO. This is the slide depicting fluid intake and output. Before describing this slide, I would like to ask one question, or a question put forward by a person or a patient to a physician. How much should be my water intake per day? Or what is the amount of fluid a physician is going to administer to a patient whom he has admitted? The amount of fluid which is going to be given by the physician or advised by the physician to his patient for intake per day would be or should be equal to the amount of water lost or output from the body. Now, how much is the output? Let us see. Output of water is by following sources. Number one, insensible loss. Insensible loss is by two sources. One is by through skin, which is about 300 ml per day. Now, this insensible loss would increase in a person who are suffering from burns or who have lost their keratinized layer of the skin. Once that is lost, the amount of water lost per day from the skin would increase to 5 to 10 times. Accordingly, we calculate the amount of fluid which has to be given to a burns patient, which is obviously higher than what we give to a non-burns patient. Next is the insensible loss through the lungs, which is about only 350 ml. In normal conditions, amount of fluid lost through spitting is 100 ml per day. In feces it is 100 ml and in urine it is 1.4 liters, which amounts to 2300 ml per day. So this is the amount of fluid which we would advise to our patients, that is to take about 2 to 3 liters of water per day as drinking water, or when we have admitted a patient, we would give this much water in form of IV fluids. Now, how much is the input? Input is the fluids in the form of ingested forms, and there is certain amount of fluid generated by metabolism, which is only about 200 ml. Maintenance of fluid volume or ECF volume. To maintain blood pressure, which is essential for adequate tissue perfusion and functions, it is important to regulate the ECF volume. The ECF volume is determined primarily by total amount of osmotically active substances in the ECF, which are sodium and chloride. These are the main and abundant osmotically active solutes in the ECF. Therefore, the mechanisms that control sodium and chloride balance, or in particular sodium balance, are the major mechanisms that defend ECF volume. The concentration of sodium in plasma and interstitial fluid ranges between 135 and 145 millimoles or milliequivalents per liter. The maintenance of ECF volume or sodium balance per se depends on the signals that reflect the adequacy of circulation, or how much circulation is adequate, which is also called as effective circulating volume, the volume of in the circulation which is effective. It is nothing but the portion of ECF that is contained within the vascular system and is effectively perfusing the tissue. What is ECF? ECV, effective circulating volume? It is a portion of ECF that is contained within the vascular system and is effectively perfusing the tissue. Sensors are there inside the circulating system which monitor the change in effective circulating volume, which are the baroreceptors located both in low and high pressure areas of circulation. These baroreceptors send the afferent signal to the brain, which translates the volume signal into several responses, but mainly the four responses, which can be classified into short term and long term. Short term effects occur as autonomic nervous system and humoral mechanisms that modulate the heart and the blood vessels to control the blood pressure mainly. The long-term mechanisms or effects generated by from the brain. They act over period of hours to days, which consists of mainly the neural, humoral and hemodynamic mechanisms that modulate sodium excretion. Now, where are these sensors present? These sensors are located in four areas. Number one, carotid sinus, aortic arch, renal afferent arteriole, and atria. These are the areas or regions where the sensors or baroreceptors for effective circulating volume are present. When they are activated, they generate four pathways which are related to sodium excretion. That is only I am going to discuss now. How the short-term regulation of blood pressure is done, it is already discussed in cardiovascular physiology. Here I am going to discuss how the four pathways activated from the stimulation of baroreceptors are going to affect sodium excretion. That is what I am going to discuss now. Let us see. There are four pathways. Pathway number one. The first pathway activated is renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When it is activated, it causes six effects. And how it is activated? Whenever there is decrease in effective circulating volume, it is sensed by the baroreceptors present in afferent renal arterioles. When the pressure or stretch over the afferent renal arterioles is reduced due to reduced effective circulating volume, there is increased amount of renin release, which causes production of angiotensin II. This angiotensin II on production, it has six effects. Number one effect is activation and production of aldosterone. Number two, it increases the sodium resorption in renal tubules and decreases sodium excretion. So it increases the resorption of sodium in renal tubules. It also enhances the tubuloglomerular balance. Tubuloglomerular balance. It causes vasoconstriction of renal vasculature, which again leads to increased sodium reabsorption, and it enhances sodium hydrogen exchanger, which promotes sodium reabsorption in proximal tubule, thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, and also initial collecting duct. These are the four effects. Effect number 5 is renal hypertrophy, and effect number 6 of renal angiotensin II aldosterone mechanism is stimulation of thirst and AVP release, which subsequently promotes sodium resorption. The pathway number 2 activated by these baroreceptors activation by reduction in effective circulating volume is stimulation of sympathetic division of autonomic nervous system. When this is activated, it causes not only the release of renin, which again activates the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, but also it can causes renal vasoconstriction, which promotes more and more sodium reabsorption and reduces sodium excretion in urine. The third effect is when the blood pressure or ECV, effective circulating volume, falls to very low level. It causes the release of arginine vasopressin hormone from posterior pituitary, which increases sodium reabsorption and reduces sodium excretion, which improves the effective circulating volume. The fourth pathway activated is the atrial natriuretic peptide release. This is the only pathway which promotes natriuresis. When the effective circulating volume is reduced, this atrial natriuretic peptide release is reduced. What does atrial natriuretic peptide do? When the effective circulating volume has increased, it increases the stretch on atria, atrial myocytes in particular, which causes the release of atrial natriuretic peptide. This natriuretic peptide, it directly stimulates the, it directly inhibits the sodium transport in inner medullary collecting ducts. That is a major action. And the other actions are, it increases cortical and medullary blood flow. When medullary blood flow increases, the medullary interstitium is washed off, which reduces the medullary osmolality. When the medullary osmolality is reduced, the passive reabsorption of sodium at thick ascending loop of Henle is reduced. The combined effect of increased blood flow to cortical region and medullary region of kidney is that increase in urinary excretion. So these are the four pathways which are activated by the volume sensors, which tries to maintain the balance of effective circulating volume. All the four parallel effector pathway modulate the sodium excretion and correct the primary change in effective circulating volume. Thus, an increase in effective circulating volume promotes sodium excretion, whereas a decrease in effective circulating volume promotes sodium excretion. Inhibits sodium excretion. One of the ion important for maintaining specific ionic composition of extracellular fluid is potassium. The normal concentration of potassium in the ECF is 4.2 to plus or minus 0.3 milliequivalents per liter. 98% of potassium is distributed in ICF and 2% is only distributed in ECF. This potassium, 65% of it is reabsorbed in proximal convoluted tubule. Remaining 27% is reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, and remaining 4% is reabsorbed from collecting ducts. But out of these, the renal potassium is secretion is the main entity which regulates the content of potassium in ECF. Now this renal potassium secretion is again regulated by four factors. Number one is aldosterone. Number two, ECF potassium concentration, tubular flow rate, and H plus ion concentration. Let us see how it regulates. Whenever there is increase in potassium intake, which is the primary driving force for increasing the potassium secretion, what happens is there is increase in plasma potassium concentration, which stimulates aldosterone release. This aldosterone released, it acts on the principal cells of cortical collecting ducts, and it incorporates potassium channels on the luminal side, which increases the potassium secretion in the cortical collecting tubules. That is how when there is increase in potassium intake, there is increase in plasma concentration of potassium, which increases the aldosterone, and this aldosterone causes increased secretion of potassium, and there is increased loss of potassium from the urine. Now let us see how tubular flow rate increases the potassium secretion. Whenever there is increase in tubular flow rate, the amount of potassium lost increases. So the secreted, whatever secreted potassium is there, is continuously flushed down the renal tubules. So there is rise in tubular potassium concentration becomes minimized, and then the net potassium secretion is increased. Next is H plus ion concentration. Whenever H plus ion concentration increases in the extracellular fluid, it reduces potassium secretion. Therefore, acidosis reduces potassium secretion, whereas alkalosis increases potassium secretion and subsequently loss of potassium from the body. One of the ion which is important for maintenance of specific ionic composition of extracellular fluid is calcium. Its normal value in ECF is 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. 99% of this calcium is distributed in bones, 1% is present in the intracellular fluid, 0.1% is distributed in ECF. As 50% ionized form, 40% bound to plasma, and 10% complex with phosphates. In the kidneys, 70% is reabsorbed in proximal convoluted tubule, 20% is reabsorbed in thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, approximately 9% is reabsorbed in distal convoluted tubule, and 1% is reabsorbed in cortical collecting ducts. And daily 1% of calcium is lost from the renal tubules in urine. Let us see the factors affecting tubular calcium reabsorption. The most important factor is parathormone. This parathormone acts on the renal tubules and reduces calcium excretion and increases calcium reabsorption, particularly in thick ascending limb of loop of Henle and distal convoluted tubule. When the parathormone levels increase, there is increased calcium resorption and reduced calcium excretion. And conversely, when parathormone levels fall, there is increased calcium excretion. Next important factor is ECF volume. As the ECF volume increases and blood pressure increases, there is decrease in calcium excretion, and vice versa. Whenever there is decrease in volume, there is increase in calcium excretion. Plasma phosphate concentration. Whenever there is fall in plasma phosphate concentration, it increases the parathormone levels, which reduce calcium excretion and increase the calcium reabsorption. Acidosis, that is change in pH towards the lesser side, generally increases calcium excretion, whereas increase in pH or decrease in H plus ion concentration generally tends to reduce calcium excretion. Here in this graphic, all the factors that alter renal excretion are summarized. Here are the factors which decrease the calcium excretion, that is increase in parathormone level, reduced ECF volume, blood pressure, increase in plasma phosphate level, metabolic alkalosis, and vitamin D3. And the factors that increase calcium excretion are decrease in parathormone, increase extracellular fluid volume, increase in blood pressure, reduction in plasma phosphate, and metabolic acidosis. Another important ion that influences the specific ionic composition of ECF is phosphate. Normal concentration of phosphate in the plasma is 2.5 to 4.5 milligram per deciliter. In kidneys, in renal tubules, 80% of phosphate is reabsorbed in proximal convoluted tubule, and about 10% is reabsorbed in distal convoluted tubules, and 10% is lost in urine. Now this reabsorption is mainly controlled by tubular maximum for phosphate, which is again affected by two factors. Number one factor is dietary intake, and number two is parathormone. Whenever there is low phosphate intake in diet, it increases the resorptive power or lowers the threshold for transport maximum for reabsorption of phosphate. So that's how whenever there is low dietary phosphate intake, there is increased resorptive power and more reabsorption of phosphate occurs. Next important factors which affects the renal reabsorption of phosphate is parathormone. When the parathormone levels rise, phosphate resorption is reduced and phosphate excretion increases, and vice versa happens when parathormone levels fall down. Magnesium also plays an important role in maintenance of specific ionic composition of ECF. The plasma concentration of magnesium is 1.7 to 2.3 milligram per deciliter, 50% of which is distributed in bones, remaining is present in ICF, and less than 1% is present in ECF. The factors that affect renal handling are the renal excretion of magnesium are its ECF concentration. As extracellular fluid concentration of magnesium increases, the excretion of magnesium also increases. Whenever there is ECF volume expansion or increase in ECF volume, magnesium excretion increases. Whenever plasma calcium concentration level increases, the magnesium level excreted in the urine also increases. An important clinical implication related to fluid electrolyte balance is edema and effusion. Edema is the excessive accumulation of fluid in body tissues, which could be inside the cell or outside the cell. Generally, inside the cell, accumulation of fluid is due to hyponatremia. Outside the cell, or edema of extracellular fluid origin is due to two main causes. Number one, abnormal leakage of fluid from the plasma to interstitial spaces across the capillaries, which could be due to disturbance in the Starling forces, which are increased capillary filtration coefficient, increased capillary hydrostatic pressure, decreased plasma colloid osmotic pressure. So these are the different derangement in the Starling's forces which causes edema. The other cause for extracellular edema is failure of lymphatics to return the fluid from the interstitium back to the blood. Now what is this effusion? Effusion is also accumulation of fluid, but accumulation of fluid in potential spaces like pleura, pericardium, pericardial space, pleural space is called as effusion. So that is the important difference which we should know. That's all about the physiology of fluid and electrolyte balance. Uh, any questions or any queries, you can put it in the comment section, or you can also put in the Telegram group which is allotted to you. Please go through the video and answer the assignment given to you.